The House chamber buzzed with tension as Representative Jasmine Crockett walked toward the podium. Her bright red blazer stood out sharply against the otherwise serious backdrop of the room. The C-SPAN cameras focused in on her calm yet determined face as she prepared to speak on a highly controversial voting rights bill that had split lawmakers along party lines. Speaker Mike Johnson, standing at his elevated position, appeared visibly tense. Before Crockett could finish even 3 sentences, Johnson struck his gavel hard. "The gentlewoman is out of order and will be seated," he declared firmly. The entire chamber fell silent as her microphone suddenly went dead with an audible click. Remaining composed, Crockett's voice carried across the room. "Mr. Speaker, I have been recognized for my allotted time." But Johnson's tone hardened. "The gentlewoman from Texas is no longer recognized and will be seated immediately." What happened next shocked not only Congress but the entire nation. When Crockett refused to back down, Johnson took an extraordinary step. "The gentlewoman from Texas is banned from speaking on the House floor for the remainder of this session." The gallery gasped in disbelief. Democratic members rose in protest, their voices echoing through the chamber. No one expected what would follow, a reaction from members of Johnson's own party that would shift the balance of power in the House within just 1 hour. Representative Jasmine Crockett was not someone easily silenced. A former civil rights attorney known for her boldness in the courtroom. The 42-year-old Democrat from Texas had quickly become a rising star in Congress. Her reputation for sharp preparation and her ability to dismantle arguments with precision made her both a champion for voting rights and a persistent challenge for Republican leadership. Speaker Mike Johnson, a 52-year-old Republican from Louisiana, had only recently secured the House speakership after months of internal party conflict. A constitutional lawyer with deep ties to conservative organizations, Johnson campaigned on a promise to bring order and stability back to the House. Supporters saw him as a firm and principled leader. Critics accused him of being authoritarian and dismissive of dissenting voices. The session that day was set to debate the Election Integrity Act, a Republican-backed proposal aiming to tighten voter ID laws and restrict early voting hours. Democrats strongly opposed the bill, arguing that it would unfairly impact minority and low-income communities. The debate was more than just political, it was deeply personal for many watching. In the gallery sat civil rights legend James Lawson, now 95, who once marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., alongside Asha Henderson, a 23-year-old activist who had helped register over 50,000 new voters. To them, this bill symbolized a continuing fight for equality across generations. For Speaker Johnson, the stakes couldn't have been higher. With only a narrow Republican majority, even a few defectors could block the bill. Some moderate Republicans had already expressed concerns about backlash from their diverse districts. Johnson knew he had to enforce strict party unity, and Crockett's sharp criticism of the bill threatened to sway those on the fence. "The American people sent us here to restore trust in our elections, not to stir division," Johnson declared at the start of the session, setting a firm tone that left little room for opposition. Yet, as Crockett stood at her microphone, refusing to sit down despite being ordered to, the room grew thick with tension. This was no longer just a procedural argument. It was a battle over who gets to speak in American democracy, and who holds the power to silence others. "Mr. Speaker, with all due respect," Crockett said firmly, her voice steady, "there is no rule that allows you to silence an elected member without a formal vote of the chamber." Murmurs spread across the floor. Johnson's face reddened as he struck his gavel again and again. "The gentlewoman will be seated, or she will be removed by the sergeant-at-arms." Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries immediately stood. "Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker. Under what rule are you banning a member from speaking without a vote?" "The chair has the authority to maintain order in this chamber," Johnson replied sharply. Meanwhile, the House parliamentarians looked visibly confused, flipping through rule books. One leaned toward the chief parliamentarian, who shook his head. "Mr. Speaker," Crockett called out again, calm but unwavering, I had spoken exactly 27 words. What, specifically, was out of order? Johnson ignored her question, instead turning toward the sergeant-at-arms. If the gentlewoman does not take her seat immediately, she will be escorted from the chamber, Speaker Mike Johnson declared, his voice echoing across the tense House floor. The Democratic side erupted in outrage, several members shouting, "Point of order!" and "Parliamentary inquiry," all at once. In the press gallery above, journalists scrambled to type updates on their phones and laptops as the dramatic confrontation unfolded in real time. Then, something completely unexpected happened. Representative Tom Cole, a respected Republican and chairman of the Rules Committee, rose to speak. "Mr. Speaker, point of order. I believe we should consult the parliamentarian before taking such an extraordinary action," he said firmly. The chamber froze. Even Johnson seemed caught off guard by the challenge from a senior member of his own party. "The chair has made its ruling," Johnson replied, though his tone carried less confidence now. The chief parliamentarian, caught on camera, looked uneasy, leaning forward, clearly trying to get Johnson's attention. The speaker deliberately avoided eye contact. "Mr. Speaker," called Representative Jim McGovern, the ranking Democrat on the Rules Committee, "I move that the House suspend the rules to hold an immediate vote on whether Representative Crockett should be allowed to speak her allotted time. Normally, such a motion requiring a two-thirds majority would fail strictly along party lines. But the mood in the chamber had clearly shifted. Then a voice from the Republican side broke the tension. "Mr. Speaker, I second the motion," said Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, a well-known moderate. Gasps filled the room. Even Johnson's expression betrayed shock at the sudden defection from within his ranks. Cameras caught other moderate Republicans exchanging quiet whispers and uncertain glances. Johnson, visibly rattled, finally recognized McGovern's motion. The clerk began preparations for a vote. Crockett stood firm at the podium, calm, poised, and unshaken. In the gallery, civil rights legend James Lawson leaned forward, gripping the railing tightly, while Asha Henderson, her phone streaming live to thousands online, watched with a mix of outrage and determination. "The House will vote on the motion to suspend the rules," Johnson announced, his voice strained. As the electronic board lit up with votes, reporters in the press gallery typed furiously. Something remarkable was happening. Dozens of moderate Republicans were voting aye, breaking away from their leadership. The room buzzed with disbelief as names appeared on the screen. Moments later, the clerk read the final count. On this vote, the yeas are 290. The nays are 145. Two-thirds having voted in the affirmative, the motion is adopted. The Democratic side erupted in applause. Johnson stood motionless at the podium, the gavel limp in his hand. Over 40 members of his own party had voted against him. "Mr. Speaker," called Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, "I move that Representative Crockett be permitted to speak for her full allotted time and that her words be entered into the Congressional record without restriction." Johnson, now facing a chamber that had decisively overruled him, had little room to maneuver. "The motion is agreed to," he said flatly. "The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes. As the cheers faded, Crockett adjusted her microphone. The chamber went silent. Every eye was fixed on her. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who just defended the principle that in this chamber, as in our democracy, every voice deserves to be heard," she began, her tone calm but powerful. She paused, looking directly at Johnson. What we just witnessed was an attempt to silence debate on a bill that would silence millions of Americans at the ballot box. The irony should not be lost on anyone watching. The silence was absolute. Even those who disagreed with her politically could feel the weight of the moment. "I have with me today," Crockett continued, lifting a thick binder, "the sworn statements of 372 American citizens who were denied the right to vote in the last election, despite being legally registered. These aren't hypotheticals, they're real people with names, addresses, and stories that must be heard before we vote on legislation that could make it even harder for them to participate." She opened the binder and began to read. Sarah Johnson, 68, from Plano, Texas, a retired teacher who has voted in every election since 1976, was turned away because her driver's license expired during the pandemic when DMV offices were closed. Under this bill, Mrs. Johnson and thousands like her would be permanently disenfranchised. Turning another page, Crockett continued. Marcus Washington, 24, a student at Texas Southern University, waited 7 hours to vote because his predominantly black neighborhood had one polling site for 38,000 residents, while the nearby white neighborhood had 6 locations for just 27,000. Under this bill, even the limited early voting hours that might have shortened those lines would be further cut back. The chamber remained utterly still as her words echoed through history. Live on every screen across America, the power of Representative Jasmine Crockett's words was visible on the faces of lawmakers from both parties. What had once seemed like abstract political debate now carried real human weight. Real people. Real stories? My colleagues across the aisle often speak passionately about freedom, Crockett said, her voice steady and deliberate. And I agree freedom is central to who we are as Americans. But what freedom is more fundamental than the right to have a say in how you are governed? What liberty is more sacred than the ability to cast your vote without unnecessary obstacles placed in your path? She turned directly toward the Republican benches, her gaze unwavering. I know many of you truly believe this legislation will secure our elections, she continued. I respect that belief. But I ask you to consider this: can something truly be secure if it comes at the cost of participation? A democracy where fewer voices are heard becomes less democratic, less representative, and ultimately less American. Several moderate Republicans shifted uneasily in their seats. The cameras caught Representative Brian Fitzpatrick nodding slightly as he listened. Crockett then lifted a series of charts from the Brennan Center for Justice, a nonpartisan research group. The data is clear, she said firmly. Voter fraud is nearly non-existent, less than 0.04% in study after study. But the barriers this bill would create could impact more than 21 million American citizens who lack the required forms of identification, who work during restricted voting hours, or who live in areas where polling places would be consolidated or closed altogether. Turning back to face the full chamber, Crockett continued, I am not questioning anyone's intentions here. What I'm questioning is whether the problem this bill claims to fix is even real and whether its so-called solution will cause far deeper harm to our democracy. The gallery was silent, all eyes fixed on her. James Lawson, the 95-year-old civil rights legend, nodded thoughtfully from his seat above. Aisha Henderson, still live streaming, watched with visible pride as thousands of viewers flooded her feed. Mr. Speaker, Crockett said, locking eyes with Johnson, earlier today you tried to stop these facts and these voices from being heard. I don't believe you fear me personally, or even my words. I believe you fear the power of these truths to open minds, perhaps even within your own party. Johnson's expression stayed impassive, but the cameras caught a brief flicker of discomfort. Crockett's voice rose slightly, rich with conviction. The effort to silence debate on this floor today mirrors exactly what this bill would do to millions of American voters. When we fear opposing ideas so deeply that we try to silence them rather than challenge them with reason and evidence, we betray the very foundation of the democracy we all swore to protect. She turned once more to face the full chamber. I want to thank every member who stood up today, not for me, but for the principle that in this chamber, as at the ballot box, every voice deserves to be heard. That is the America worth fighting for. That is the democracy worth protecting. As Crockett finished, the Democratic side erupted in applause, joined by several Republicans who rose in quiet support. The gallery broke into cheers, despite House rules against open demonstrations. Johnson struck his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but the momentum had already shifted. Crockett walked back to her seat, shaking hands with colleagues and exchanging brief embraces as cameras followed her. Within minutes, clips of her confrontation and speech flooded social media, spreading faster than any planned address could have. Hashtags like hashtag Let Her Speak and hashtag House Revolts began trending nationwide. Her final line, "Every voice deserves to be heard," was reposted and quoted millions of times within the first hour. What had begun as an attempt to silence one representative had instead amplified her message across America. In trying to prevent debate, Speaker Johnson had triggered the biggest national discussion on voting rights in years. By the time the House adjourned 4 hours later, the political landscape had transformed. Hashtag Let Her Speak had become the top trending topic worldwide, with more than 2 million posts. Major news networks interrupted programming to cover what analysts called an unprecedented challenge to the Speaker's authority. On CNN, veteran analyst David Gergen told viewers, "What we saw today was extraordinary, not only an attempt to silence a member without precedent or rule, but a bipartisan pushback that could redefine how this Congress operates." Outside the Capitol, cameras swarmed around Crockett, Lawson, and Henderson as they walked side by side. "Today wasn't about me," Crockett told reporters. "It was about ensuring that every American voice is heard." Lawson nodded beside her, a faint smile crossing his face, a reminder that the fight for democracy never truly ends. It was about ensuring that every voice in Congress and at the ballot box has the right to be heard. Representative Jasmine Crockett told reporters later, "What happened on the House floor today reflects what happens whenever people try to silence opposing views instead of engaging with them." Standing beside her, James Lawson spoke with the moral weight of his decades in the civil rights movement. "I've been part of this struggle for 70 years, he said. What Representative Crockett did today ties directly to what we fought for in the 1960s, the simple right to be heard, to participate, to have a say in your own government. The struggle continues, but today was a victory for democracy." Nearby, Asha Henderson, whose livestream had drawn more than 500,000 viewers, addressed the cameras. "People say my generation doesn't care about politics," she said. "That's not true. What we don't care for is politics that tries to push us out. Today proved that when someone tries to silence us, it only makes our voices louder." The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Traditional and social media exploded with reaction. Within hours, a viral compilation video appeared showing Speaker Mike Johnson's attempt to silence Crockett alongside historic footage of civil rights activists being silenced in the 1960s. It had been viewed more than 15 million times by Nightfall. Memes spread across social platforms comparing Johnson's stern pre-vote expression with his stunned look afterward, captioned with phrases like, "When silencing backfires in democracy, 1. Authoritarianism, 0. Political." Strategists instantly recognized the significance. This is one of those rare moments where procedural overreach created a genuine bipartisan backlash, said Republican strategist Tara Setmayer during a primetime news broadcast. The visual of a black woman being told she couldn't speak followed by members of both parties standing up for her right to be heard resonates deeply beyond Washington. Even conservative voices acknowledged the Speaker's misstep. On Fox News, former Congressman Trey Gowdy remarked, "Whatever your view on the bill itself, silencing debate instead of winning the argument on merit is never the right approach." Speaker Johnson overplayed his hand, and it cost him politically and personally within his own conference. By evening, the political consequences were already unfolding. Johnson's office released a statement attempting to justify his actions. Today's session was intended to focus on the content of critical election security measures, not inflammatory rhetoric. The Speaker acted to maintain decorum in the chamber. The explanation only made matters worse. The phrase inflammatory rhetoric began trending on social media as users reminded others that Crockett had spoken fewer than 30 words before. Being cut off, the night's biggest shock came when 35 moderate House Republicans released a joint statement condemning the move to silence debate. "While we may differ on policy, open debate and the free exchange of ideas are the foundation of our democracy," the statement read. Today's events did not reflect the values of this institution. We are committed to ensuring all elected representatives can speak for their constituents. The rare bipartisan rebuke exposed deep fractures within Johnson's leadership. Sources told Politico that moderate Republicans had already requested an emergency meeting with party leaders to express concerns over the speaker's tone and direction. Meanwhile, civil rights groups mobilized instantly. The NAACP and ACLU announced nationwide rallies for the weekend to rally support for voting rights. Representative Crockett's silencing and the House's reaction have reignited a new wave of activism, said NAACP President Derek Johnson. Every time people witness attempts to suppress voices, whether in Congress or at the polls, it reminds them why this fight is so essential. For James Lawson and Aisha Henderson, the day's events felt like both history repeating and hope renewed. Local news crews in Henderson's hometown filmed students gathering in school auditoriums to watch clips of Crockett's speech, many saying they felt inspired to see democracy defended in real time. What happened today connects directly to our nation's history, Lawson told reporters again that evening. I've seen attempts to silence voices throughout my life. What gives me hope now is watching people, especially from different political backgrounds, stand together against it. Some principles rise above party. On social media, the moment continued to ripple across communities. A high school civics teacher in Atlanta posted that she had shown the clip to her students. Today, my class saw both the fragility and the resilience of democratic values, she wrote. One student commented, I didn't know Congress could still work like that with people actually putting rules and fairness above politics. This was the civics lesson you can't find in textbooks. The consequences for the Election Integrity Act itself were immediate. 3 Republican representatives who had initially supported the bill announced they were reconsidering their positions after seeing Crockett's presentation. I want to make sure we're solving real problems, not creating new barriers for legitimate voters, said Representative David Velladao of California, one of the Republicans who had sided with Democrats to allow Crockett to speak. By night's end, what began as an attempt to silence one lawmaker had sparked a national reckoning on democracy, fairness, and the right to be heard. Late that night, as the story continued to dominate headlines, Representative Jasmine Crockett shared a short but powerful message on her social media platforms. Today wasn't about winning or losing a political fight. It was about protecting the idea that every voice deserves to be heard. Whether in Congress or at the ballot box, when we silence debate, we weaken democracy. When we listen and engage with those who disagree, we make it stronger. Her post included a photo of Crockett standing beside James Lawson and Aisha Henderson, 3 generations of voting rights advocates united by the same mission. The image quickly went viral, becoming a striking symbol that behind the day's dramatic scenes was a much larger question: whose voices truly count in American democracy? As morning news programs began preparing their coverage, producers realized this was not just another partisan confrontation. It was a defining moment and attempt to silence debate that had backfired so forcefully it reshaped the path of major legislation and shifted the balance of power inside the House. Speaker Mike Johnson now faced an uncertain political future. His authority had been publicly challenged by his own party, and the footage of him cutting off Crockett's microphone was replayed repeatedly across networks. Historians noted that few speakers had ever faced such a visible rebuke from members of their own conference. Especially so early in their leadership. For Representative Crockett, the episode marked a dramatic rise in her national profile. Interview requests poured in from major television networks and leading publications. Yet those close to her said she remained focused on her central mission: defending voting rights and ensuring equal access to the ballot for every citizen. The evidence packets she had tried to submit, which Johnson blocked from being entered into the official record, were now being examined by journalists across the country. Reporters began highlighting the real stories of Americans who had encountered barriers to voting, turning an abstract policy debate into a deeply human narrative. Several national newspapers announced plans to run special features inspired by the examples Crockett had presented. By the next morning, The Speaker's office announced that the vote on the Election Integrity Act would be postponed to allow for further review and possible amendments. The rare concession made it clear that the bill, in its current form, no longer had enough support to pass. Several moderate Republicans publicly stated they would not back the legislation unless major revisions were made to address the issues Crockett had raised. From his home in Tennessee, James Lawson watched the developments unfold. Speaking to a documentary crew filming a project on voting rights, he reflected, "I've seen America wrestle with questions of voice and power for nearly a century. What happened yesterday shows that the struggle is still alive, but it also shows that when democratic values are challenged, people can still unite to defend them." Meanwhile, in offices across Capitol Hill, staffers began reviewing House rules and precedents. The revolt against Johnson's actions had created a new, informal limit on the Speaker's power of bipartisan. Understanding that every elected representative must be allowed to speak for the people who sent them to Congress, even when their words are politically inconvenient, the power of Crockett's message came, not only from her words but from what they represented. In trying to suppress debate over a bill that many said would suppress voters, Speaker Johnson had created the perfect metaphor for the broader fight over participation in democracy and, ironically, had strengthened the very movement he sought to quiet. Call to action. This story proves one powerful truth: attempts to silence voices often amplify them. But protecting democracy requires more than outrage. It demands constant engagement from all of us. If this story inspired you, here are 3 actions you can take right now. Share this video using the tag #LetHerSpeak to spread awareness about the importance of open debate and voting rights. When more people understand the link between silencing voices in Congress and silencing them at the ballot box, such efforts lose their power. Check your voter registration at vote.org/action and encourage your family and friends to do the same. Many voters discover registration issues only when it's too late. Checking now ensures your voice is heard when it matters most. Subscribe to our channel for ongoing, fact-based coverage of voting rights and congressional accountability, the stories mainstream media often overlook. Tap the notification bell so you'll be the first to know how the Election Integrity Act evolves after this turning point. What happened in the House chamber that day was historic, but what happens next depends on all of us. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep defending every American's right to be heard, both in Congress and at the ballot box. We'd love to hear your perspective. What was your reaction to seeing Speaker Johnson's attempt to silence Representative Crockett? Tell us in the comments and let us know which stories of democratic resilience you'd like us to cover next.